In this lesson, we're going to cover the for loop container. The for loop container works very similarly to how a loop works in many of the coding languages that you might have had some experience with. If you think about T-SQL, it works very similar to how a while loop would work. How it works basically is it's a loop that continuously iterates until a preset boolean or true or false expression evaluates to false. Oftentimes you'll use variables to store how many times that the loop will run, and then you also have some of the properties that you'll be setting will be the initial expression, which is the initial value that the variable that you're using is going to be set to. The evaluate expression, which is the expression that tells the loop it tells it when to stop. So this must be an expression that always evaluates to true or false. So keep that in mind. And then you have the assign expression, and this expression is what changes the condition. So after it iterates one time through the loop, the assign expression tells it how to go to the next iteration of the loop. In this lesson, we're going to create a package that uses the for loop to continuously run through this loop until a table has objects or has had rows loaded into it. So we're going to have a table that we're going to initially create, and we're going to have the for loop that's going to continuously run until rows are inserted into it. So where we're going to start this time is in Management Studio. So go ahead and load up Management Studio, and your Start All Programs, and you have Microsoft SQL Server 2008 and Management Studio, SQL Server Management Studio. Once you have that loaded, you will get where I am right here. Go ahead and connect to your database engine. And we're going to create a new query. And in the new query window here, we're going to run the script I have here. I just copied and pasted it from the book, but you can also get it from the book. This is a simple table. It just has an identity column called ID, and then it's going to have a list of names. The table itself isn't too important. We're just basically going to experiment with using the for loop, and you can go ahead and create this by executing. But first, go ahead and go to AdventureWorks 2008. Make sure you're running it in the correct server, or the correct database. Then execute. So we've created our table. Now we're going to go to BIDS, Business Intelligence Development Studio. So I have my bid screen open here. I'm going to create a new package called Lesson32. Right click on the SSIS packages, say new SSIS package, and then rename the package Lesson32. You want to confirm yes, you want to rename the package object as well. Say yes to that. The first thing we're going to do is create a variable for our package. And to do that, you can either right-click on the control flow and select variables, or you can simply just select your variables tab on the side here if you already have it available to you. Remember, to create a new variable, you simply click the Add Variable button. And this variable is going to stay at the scope level, or the scope is going to be at the package level, and our data type is going to be an int32. We'll leave that. And we're going to call this variable counter. Just gives it some kind of significant name to what it's doing, because it's basically going to count, or it can be used to count as many times as we're going to iterate through the loop we're about to create. So the first step we're going to do is bring over a for loop container from your toolbox, and bring over a for loop container. Now before we get too far, let's go ahead and create a new OLEDB connection manager to the AdventureWorks 2008 database that we already created that table in. I have the preset for it here, the data connection, so go ahead and say OK to that if you have it, and then rename it just AdventureWorks 2008. Okay, so let's bring over and execute SQL task inside our loop here. So I'm going to bring over and execute SQL task and place it inside the loop. And we're going to go ahead and configure the execute SQL task first. So in our SQL statement, we're going to use this simple if statement, and I'll explain what it's doing here. So this statement is looking for, it has an if statement, if our table has any rows in it, any name column rows, if it set the record inserted to 1, else set it to 0. And you'll see how we're going to use that later here in a moment. So go ahead and press OK to that. And on our connection, remember we're going to use the AdventureWorks 2008 database. We also want to set our result set to single row, because we have this variable that we're getting a single result from. And in our result set tab on the side here, we're going to say we want to add, and we're going to give the result name this records inserted, which was the variable we had inside our little statement here. And then we're going to also say we want to use, it already has it set here, but we want to use the user variable counter that we created. So that is correct. It only lets you do user variables here. So whatever the results are of this SQL statement is going to go into that variable. And in just a moment that variable is going to determine how many times this loop runs. So now we're ready to configure our loop. Go ahead and double click on the top portion to open the for loop editor. And you'll see the different expression properties that I talked about earlier, the for loop properties. We have the initial expression, which is the initial value that it's going to be set to. And we're going to set that to where the @counter. Remember, this is a variable, and in this screen it is case sensitive. So if I did it lowercase, it would not work because it's case sensitive and I capitalized counter. I'm going to say where counter equals 0. That's what the initial value is going to be. I want the evaluated expression to be @counter equals 0. So the double equals is telling it when it doesn't equal 0, it can complete. Remember, the evaluate expression is it has to be a Boolean expression, so it needs to be true or false. I have the initial value to equal 0, and then the evaluate expression when it can be done, which it tells you on the bottom here what the eval expression actually is. It has to be the true or false statement, which I'm saying it's going to not equal 0. And this one I'm not going to have an assign expression, but it's very common to do this. So one typical thing that you might do is you might start this off at 0 or 1. So this is just an example of another way that you might do this. But for this example, we're doing it a special way. So we're going to say that we want our counter to start at 1, and we want it to continue as long as it's less than 5. So we're going to iterate through this as many times as it until it equals 5. As soon as it equals 5, it's going to stop. Then we're going to have the counter that is where @counter equals @counter plus 1. So this is another typical way of using it. I thought I'd show you because this is a very common way of using the for loop container, but I was trying to show you a special way for our example. Remember, this initial expression is saying that I initially wanted the value to start at 1. I want it to complete as long as it doesn't reach 5. And then I want each time it iterates through the loop, I want to add 1 to that variable. But let's go back to the original plans. We're not going to do the assign variable or the assign expression at all. And we're going to say where this does not equal 0. This does equal 0. Alright, so whenever you have that, go ahead and click OK. And we're ready to run this. I'm going to go ahead and get, remember this package is going to run continuously until any values are inserted into the for loop table. So go ahead and have your script ready. I'm going to copy and paste this into our management studio. It's just going to insert some values from the person.person table into our for loop table. So back in our package, I'm going to go ahead and execute this, and you'll see that it'll continuously run until I execute that script. So let me right click on the package and say execute package, and we'll see this is going to stay yellow. And it's going to blink green because it keeps going through this. It's iterating through this loop over and over and over and over and over. And if I minimize this, or make this a little bit smaller, you can see it's going to continue to go until I execute this script. I'm going to go ahead and execute it. And now you see it completed. It finally got some kind of value. Remember, our SQL statement was looking for, as long as there are no values in this record set, we're going to set the value of our variable to 1. As soon as there is 1, we're going to set it to 0. And remember that our for loop container was going to continue until it equals 0. Alright, so let's go ahead and review what we learned about the for loop container. Alright, so in this lesson we learned how to configure the for loop container and use some of the properties that are common with it, which is the initial expression. That's the expression that the variable is going to initially be set to. The evaluate expression, which is how we're going to tell the loop to stop iterating through whatever contents it has in the container. In our case, and remember this has to be a true or false Boolean expression. And then we also have the assign expression, which we talked about but we didn't use in our example. The assign expression is what you're going to assign the variable after each iteration of the loop. So after each time it runs through the loop, what are you going to assign the variable to next? We talked about that the for loop container is very similar to any kind of looping mechanism you might have in other coding languages, like in T-SQL is equivalent to a while loop. And that you remember that you use variables to store how many times you're going to iterate through the loop.